Hey everyone, welcome to my channel from start to now. If you love uncovering hidden stories from history, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's dive in. Imagine walking down the neon-lit streets of Tokyo today, surrounded by cutting-edge technology, buzzing subways, and the hum of modern life. You see people in crisp suits, students glued to their phones, and the organized chaos of one of the busiest cities in the world. But have you ever wondered what secrets lie beneath this modern exterior? What stories of power, survival, and mystery have been lost to time, hidden from the textbooks you studied in school? Today, I'm taking you on a journey into Japan's untold history, the side of the past they never taught you, the stories that could completely change the way you see this fascinating country. When most people think about Japan's history, the first images that come to mind are of samurai, temples, or the imperial family, but very few realize that long before any of these well-known figures existed, Japan was home to ancient civilizations that were far more advanced than most textbooks ever acknowledge. We often imagine early Japan as a collection of small, scattered villages struggling to survive in a harsh environment. That image is not only incomplete, it's misleading. Archaeologists and historians have uncovered evidence suggesting that some of the earliest communities were not only thriving, but had developed sophisticated urban planning, engineering techniques, and social structures that rivaled other ancient civilizations in the world. These societies were capable of large-scale construction, water management, and agriculture that allowed them to sustain dense populations in ways that most people wouldn't expect from a prehistoric island nation. The remains of these settlements, sometimes buried underground or hidden beneath forests, reveal intricate layouts with streets, buildings, and even drainage systems. Imagine walking through what appears to be a quiet rural area today and realizing that beneath your feet lies the foundation of a city that existed thousands of years before the rise of the emperors you learned about in school. The precision and organization required for such constructions indicate a level of social coordination that goes far beyond simple tribal living. There were leaders, engineers, planners, and artisans all contributing to a complex society. Yet for reasons that historians are still piecing together, these civilizations were either erased or diminished in later historical accounts. The artifacts found, pottery, tools, and remnants of structures, tell stories of daily life, trade, and technological innovation. Some pottery shows intricate designs and functional sophistication, suggesting that these early people had both artistic sensibility and practical skill. Tools made from stone and metal indicate knowledge of metallurgy and craftsmanship that likely required specialized training. There are even hints of early trade networks connecting communities across the islands and possibly with the Asian mainland, demonstrating that these civilizations were not isolated. They were interacting, learning, and exchanging ideas, laying the foundations for what would become one of the most resilient and innovative cultures in history. What's fascinating is how little of this is included in standard historical narratives. Textbooks often jump straight from prehistoric Jomon and Yayoi periods to legendary emperors and mythological stories, skipping over the complexity and sophistication of these early societies. Scholars suggest that part of this omission is intentional. When a new ruling class consolidates power, it's often in their interest to simplify the past, to present a linear story of divine descent and uninterrupted progress, acknowledging the existence of sophisticated civilizations before the imperial lineage would disrupt that narrative. It challenges the idea that leadership and culture were solely handed down from gods or singular rulers, and it opens questions about lost knowledge and technologies. Some of the structural remains discovered, for instance, suggest a level of civil engineering that we typically associate with more widely studied ancient civilizations, like those in Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley. There are raised foundations, underground storage areas, and stone arrangements designed to withstand natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. Considering Japan's geographic volatility, it makes sense that these societies would have developed advanced methods of construction and planning. The knowledge and techniques required to accomplish this were likely passed down through generations, yet much of it was forgotten, buried beneath layers of sediment, forest, and time. It's remarkable to think that the cities and infrastructure we take for granted in modern Japan may have been influenced, even indirectly, by these ancient innovations. Even more intriguing are the ceremonial sites and artifacts that suggest complex spiritual and social structures. Stone circles, burial mounds, and ceremonial tools indicate that these societies had systems of governance, ritual, and perhaps even education. They weren't merely surviving, they were organizing, reflecting, and planning. The way they structured their settlements, their daily lives, and even their spiritual practices points to a sophisticated understanding of community dynamics, resource management, and environmental adaptation. Many of these discoveries have been found accidentally during modern construction projects or agricultural development. What was once considered a simple plot of land often reveals remnants of walls, roads, or dwellings that date back thousands of years. Each excavation uncovers not just objects, but insights into how people lived, worked, and interacted in a society that was far more advanced than most history classes acknowledge. And while some artifacts have been studied and preserved, many others remain in storage or in private collections, inaccessible to the public. This makes the hidden history even more tantalizing because it suggests there's still so much we don't know. Every new discovery challenges the conventional timeline of Japanese history and forces us to rethink assumptions about cultural development, technology, and social organization. Imagine if schools spent as much time exploring these early civilizations as they do teaching about samurai or shoguns. How would our understanding of Japan and even the broader history of human civilization change? The presence of complex urban layouts, advanced tools, and evidence of trade and governance paints a picture of a society that was dynamic, innovative, and resilient. It also opens up questions about why so much of this knowledge was lost, suppressed, or ignored. Perhaps these civilizations were absorbed by later populations, or perhaps their knowledge was deliberately hidden to protect political power. The truth may be a combination of both. What's undeniable is that the hidden history of Japan's ancient civilizations reveals a depth and richness that few people ever get to learn about. It shows a Japan that was far from isolated or primitive. It was a society that valued organization, skill, and innovation, laying a foundation for the cultural, technological, and social achievements that would come centuries later. By exploring these forgotten societies, we not only uncover fascinating artifacts and ruins, but also gain a better understanding of human ingenuity and resilience. It forces us to rethink what we consider the starting point of civilization in Japan and challenges the notion that history begins with well-documented rulers or legendary figures. These hidden civilizations tell a story of creativity, survival, and intelligence that resonates even today, and they remind us that history is often much richer than the versions presented in classrooms. They challenge our assumptions, inspire curiosity, and invite us to look deeper, to question what we've been taught, and to seek out the truths that lie just beneath the surface of what we think we know. Understanding these ancient societies isn't just an academic exercise. It's a way to connect with the people who came before, to see how their choices, skills, and innovations shaped the world we live in now. In many ways, discovering this hidden history is like opening a door to a parallel world, one where Japan's story is more complex, more fascinating, and more human than the sanitized versions we're often presented with. And as we continue to uncover artifacts, study ruins, and piece together evidence, we're constantly reminded that history isn't fixed. It's alive, waiting for curious minds to uncover its secrets, to challenge the narratives, and to appreciate the full depth of human ingenuity. When most people think about samurai and ninja, the first images that come to mind are usually from movies or anime noble warriors in shining armor, disciplined swordsmen performing impossible feats, or stealthy assassins slipping through the shadows at night. But the reality of these figures in Japanese history is far more fascinating, complex, and sometimes even darker than popular culture lets on. The samurai were not just warriors in a vacuum. They were central to the political, social, and cultural structure of Japan for hundreds of years, and their influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Schools often teach the Bushido Code as a set of moral principles, a code of honor, loyalty, and discipline. But the truth is that Bushido, as it was practiced, was less about philosophy and more about survival, strategy, and maintaining power. Samurai were enforcers, administrators, and sometimes ruthless strategists who used every tool at their disposal to protect their clans and increase their influence. Loyalty was not always absolute. Many samurai switched allegiances, betrayed their lords, or participated in covert operations to secure advantages for themselves or their families. It was a world where honor was intertwined with cunning, where the line between heroism and treachery was blurred, and where survival depended as much on intelligence and political skill as on swordsmanship. And here's an often overlooked fact. Many samurai were not ethnically Japanese in the strictest sense. Japan has always been a crossroads of cultures, and over centuries, warriors and strategists from neighboring regions integrated into Japanese society, bringing new skills, techniques, and perspectives that transformed martial and political strategies. These outsiders sometimes rose to positions of immense power, influencing events in ways that traditional narratives rarely acknowledge. It's fascinating to think that the image of the samurai as a purely native, unchanging class is not entirely accurate. Behind the stoic mask of armor, there was a dynamic, adaptable, and highly intelligent warrior class that understood the value of networks, information, and psychological warfare. Then there's the world of the ninja, which is often even more misunderstood. Popular culture presents them as shadowy assassins, clad in black, performing acrobatics that defy physics and disappearing into thin air. The historical truth is that the ninja were not just killers. They were masters of espionage, subterfuge, and psychological strategy. They specialized in gathering intelligence, creating deception, and manipulating outcomes without ever being seen. Their expertise extended to poisons, traps, early forms of chemical warfare, and survival techniques that allowed them to move unseen through dangerous terrain or infiltrate heavily guarded locations. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the ninja is their versatility. They were not merely agents of war, they were also teachers, advisors, and strategists. Many ninja families maintained secret schools where skills were passed down for generations, often alongside lessons in politics, leadership, and science. They operated in the shadows, shaping events behind the scenes, while society at large remained oblivious to their influence. The samurai and ninja worlds were deeply interconnected and sometimes blurred. While samurai controlled armies and territories, ninja operated in the hidden layers of society, influencing outcomes, protecting interests, and gathering intelligence. They complemented each other in ways that textbooks rarely explain, because it challenges the simplified narratives of heroism, honor, and linear history. Both classes operated under a shared understanding that survival and influence required more than brute force. Knowledge, observation, cunning, and adaptability were just as important as any sword or skill in battle. And yet, despite their prominence, the stories of samurai and ninja are often sanitized. We rarely hear about the brutal realities: assassinations carried out in the dead of night, clan rivalries that ended in total destruction, political manipulations that determined the fate of entire regions, and the constant tension between loyalty and self-interest. The romanticized images of honorable warriors are rooted in some truth, but they omit the complex, often morally ambiguous world in which these figures lived. Another overlooked aspect is how samurai and ninja adapted over time. When the feudal era ended and Japan began to modernize during the Meiji Restoration, many samurai and ninja didn't vanish. They reinvented themselves. Some became advisors in government, military strategists in the modernizing army, or even educators, passing down knowledge in ways that shaped Japan's transformation. The skills honed over centuries of conflict and intrigue didn't disappear. They evolved to meet new challenges. And this hidden legacy extends beyond military or political influence. Samurai were patrons of the arts, philosophy, and culture. They helped shape literature, poetry, tea ceremonies, and martial arts not just as forms of expression, but as tools of discipline, social hierarchy, and strategy. Ninja, too, influenced scientific thinking, herbal medicine, and early engineering techniques. Their contributions often appear in subtle, almost invisible ways, woven into the fabric of Japanese culture, yet few people realize their origins. What's striking is how both groups embodied the idea that knowledge is power, and secrecy is survival. Every skill, every piece of information, and every strategic decision was part of a larger system designed to maintain influence and protect oneself in a volatile world. By studying their lives, methods, and philosophies, we gain insight into how human ingenuity adapts under pressure, and how complex social structures can exist in ways that aren't immediately visible. And the influence of samurai and ninja extends even into modern Japan. Corporate strategies, negotiation tactics, leadership styles, and even certain cultural practices carry echoes of the methods these ancient figures used centuries ago. The emphasis on observation, patience, subtlety, and precision in modern Japanese society has roots in the very strategies that samurai and ninja perfected in the shadows. The more we look at the historical records, the more we realize that these figures were not isolated relics of the past. They were part of a living system of intelligence, strategy, and adaptation that shaped the trajectory of the entire nation. Their stories remind us that history is rarely simple, that the people we consider heroes or villains were operating in a world that required constant vigilance, cunning, and adaptation. And in recognizing this, we start to see that the world we think we know, the orderly, modern Japan, is built on layers of complexity, strategy, and secret histories that are fascinating to uncover and essential to understand fully. When we think about learning history, most of us assume that what we're taught in schools is an accurate and complete reflection of the past, but the reality is far more complicated. In Japan, as in many countries, the history presented to students was carefully curated to shape perception, promote loyalty, and maintain social order. Schools were not necessarily designed to encourage critical thinking or curiosity. Instead, they were designed to produce obedient citizens who would accept authority without question. This means that entire chapters of Japanese history, moments of rebellion, scandal, and secret influence, were omitted, rewritten, or simplified to fit a narrative that supported those in power. One of the most fascinating aspects of this manipulated history is how consistent it is across centuries. From the Tokugawa era through the Meiji Restoration and even into modern textbooks, the story is carefully structured to highlight certain achievements, heroes, and moral lessons, while minimizing or completely ignoring events that might challenge the official narrative. For example, school history often celebrates samurai as paragons of honor and discipline, while glossing over the political intrigue, betrayals, and occasional corruption that were part of everyday life in the warrior class. Likewise, the ninja are often depicted as mythical figures, stripped of their deep social and political significance. By removing the messy realities, history becomes a sanitized story, simple enough for students to memorize and accept without question. But the consequences of this selective storytelling are profound. By controlling which events and figures are highlighted, rulers and educators shaped collective memory, influencing how generations understood their identity, values, and place in the world. Ordinary citizens were presented with heroes and villains, right and wrong, without being given the tools to question motivations, contexts, or the complexity of human behavior. The manipulation wasn't always overt, sometimes it took the form of omission. Many revolutionary thinkers, inventors, and dissenters who challenged authority were systematically erased from official accounts. Their contributions were forgotten or credited to others, and their lives became footnotes at best. And yet, these individuals were critical to the development of society, introducing ideas, technologies, or philosophies that shaped Japan's trajectory in profound ways. By ignoring them, history books created the illusion of smooth progress, continuity, and moral clarity, when the reality was far more chaotic, experimental, and often morally ambiguous. Another fascinating layer of this hidden history is how the manipulation extended to cultural and social knowledge. Textbooks often simplify religious practices, mythologies, and traditional customs, stripping them of their political or social significance. Stories of gods, spirits, and mystical creatures were not merely fanciful tales. They often encoded real historical events, social warnings, or political messages. By removing these layers, educators transformed what was once a complex, multi-dimensional society into something linear, tidy, and easily digestible, and the strategy worked remarkably well. Generations grew up with a very particular understanding of their past, one that emphasized certain values, reinforced loyalty to authority, and minimized critical inquiry. People were taught to admire rulers, accept official interpretations of events, and view history as a collection of lessons rather than a series of complex human choices. What's equally fascinating is how this controlled narrative affected public perception of modernization. During the Meiji Restoration, when Japan was rapidly transforming its political, economic, and social systems, schools reinforced the idea of inevitable progress guided by enlightened leaders. The reality, however, was far more nuanced. Modernization involved coercion, displacement, and the strategic suppression of dissent. Entire communities were uprooted, traditional practices banned, and foreign advisors brought in to reshape the country according to Western ideals. By presenting these changes as orderly and natural, history education downplayed the human cost, the social upheaval, and the hidden networks of influence that made these transformations possible. And this selective education wasn't limited to the distant past. Even during the 20th century, particularly leading up to and during World War II, history lessons were carefully tailored to promote nationalism, obedience, and a particular vision of Japan's role in the world. Students were often presented with a glorified account of military campaigns and territorial expansion, while omitting the strategies, secret operations, and morally complex decisions behind the scenes. Ordinary citizens who lived through these times often witnessed realities that starkly contradicted the textbooks, yet future generations would grow up believing in a sanitized version of events. Understanding this manipulation of history is crucial because it highlights a universal truth. History is never entirely neutral. Whoever controls the narrative can shape perception, influence values, and determine what is remembered or forgotten. In Japan, this has meant generations learning a story of their nation that emphasizes continuity, honor, and moral clarity, while omitting the messy, fascinating, and sometimes morally ambiguous actions that actually drove historical events. And yet, even with this deliberate control, fragments of the hidden history survive. Archaeological discoveries, preserved letters, secret scrolls, and oral histories provide glimpses into what was deliberately hidden from public education. These sources show us a Japan full of innovation, rebellion, human error, and strategic brilliance, elements that rarely appear in school curricula. For those who dig deeper, these fragments reveal a far more dynamic, complex society than the linear narratives suggest. They also challenge us to reconsider what we accept as official history. By piecing together hidden events, understanding motives, and analyzing inconsistencies in textbooks, we can gain a more complete, nuanced understanding of Japan's past. This kind of critical inquiry not only reshapes our understanding of history, but also encourages us to think differently about knowledge, authority, and the stories we are told in every aspect of life. The manipulation of history also had practical consequences in shaping culture and identity. By presenting a simplified, morally tidy version of the past, schools reinforced social hierarchies and expectations. Children learned who they were supposed to admire, emulate, and obey. They were taught to value loyalty, discipline, and conformity over questioning authority or exploring alternative perspectives. In this way, education became a tool not just for learning, but for shaping citizens, ensuring that society remained stable and predictable according to the vision of those in power. But the hidden history reminds us that the truth is never fully controllable. Despite deliberate omissions and revisions, traces of the real events, secret networks, and extraordinary individuals persist. Historians and curious minds can uncover them, challenging accepted narratives and revealing a Japan far richer, more complex, and more human than the sanitized versions found in classrooms. This is why exploring hidden history is so compelling. It forces us to confront the gap between what we are taught and what actually occurred. It challenges the assumptions we take for granted and invites us to see the world not as a tidy story, but as a complex tapestry of human action, choice, and consequence. And it shows that history is alive, not fixed. It is shaped by those who write it, but it can be rediscovered, reinterpreted, and understood in new ways when we look beyond the surface. By recognizing the manipulation inherent in Japan's historical education, we gain a deeper appreciation for the hidden layers of society, politics, and culture that textbooks ignore. We also learn an important lesson. The story of the past is never complete without curiosity, skepticism, and the willingness to seek out voices and perspectives that were deliberately excluded from the official record. It is in these hidden stories that we find the true texture of history, the complexity, the intrigue, the human struggles, and the remarkable achievements that schools often simplify or omit. And in uncovering them, we not only learn more about Japan, but also about the nature of history itself, how it is told, and why some truths are hidden while others are celebrated. When most people think about Japan's modernization during the Meiji Restoration, The images that come to mind are often grand: factories rising from the countryside, railroads stretching across the islands, and a nation suddenly transforming itself into a global power. It's easy to think of this period as a natural evolution, as if Japan's rise was inevitable, a smooth story of progress guided by enlightened leaders. But the hidden history behind this transformation tells a far more complex and intriguing story, one that schools rarely teach. The rapid modernization of Japan was not simply the result of clever policies or industrial ambition. It was deeply influenced by secret networks, political maneuvering, and the adaptive strategies of former samurai and ninja who had survived centuries of upheaval. Many of the very individuals who had been part of feudal power structures found new roles in shaping the modern nation. Samurai, who once wielded swords on the battlefield, became strategists, military advisors, and bureaucrats. Their knowledge of leadership, logistics, and intelligence operations, honed over generations, was invaluable to a government attempting to rapidly transform an entire society. Similarly, former ninja families, masters of strategy and secrecy, played roles behind the scenes, advising on espionage, security, and even early forms of scientific experimentation that contributed to Japan's industrial and military growth. What's particularly fascinating is how these hidden influences were deliberately obscured from mainstream narratives. Textbooks emphasize the role of Western advisors, the vision of emperors, and the brilliance of modernization plans, while the contributions of these secret networks are often minimized or ignored entirely. The reality is that Japan's transformation was as much a product of hidden knowledge, inherited skills, and covert coordination as it was of public policies and visible reforms, and the cost of modernization was staggering. Communities were uprooted, traditional practices were banned, and cultural identities were sometimes forcibly reshaped to align with the government's vision. Entire populations were asked to adapt to new technologies, social hierarchies, and ways of thinking, often without full understanding or consent. The social upheaval was immense, yet it was presented as a natural, inevitable progression in history, masking the tension, resistance, and human suffering that accompanied it. In exploring this hidden history, we also see how innovation was often driven by necessity and secrecy. Early industrial projects, military developments, and technological experiments were sometimes conducted in private workshops, secret labs, or hidden facilities. Knowledge that might have threatened political stability or revealed strategic advantage was closely guarded, passed only to trusted individuals or families. This culture of secrecy, inherited from the feudal era, played a critical role in Japan's rapid modernization, allowing for bold experimentation while minimizing exposure to outside interference or domestic resistance. It's easy to overlook just how radical this transformation was. Japan went from a feudal society dominated by a rigid class system to a rapidly industrializing nation in the span of a few decades. The speed of this change was unprecedented, and it required not only innovation but also an intricate understanding of human behavior, logistics, and social engineering. Hidden networks of samurai, ninja, and advisors provided the intellectual and strategic backbone necessary for such a massive shift. They understood how to manipulate systems, manage populations, and guide the nation through the chaos of transformation without causing total collapse. And yet, even with all this planning, the process was messy, unpredictable, and full of tension. Resistance emerged from traditionalists who sought to preserve old ways, from peasants and workers who struggled to adapt, and from regional leaders wary of losing influence. Every reform had to be carefully managed, every innovation carefully introduced, often with the aid of secrecy, deception, and carefully orchestrated timing. This complexity is rarely conveyed in school lessons, which tend to simplify history into a story of progress, innovation, and inevitable success. But the hidden reality reveals a far richer tapestry of human ingenuity, adaptation, and strategy. Another overlooked element is the role of covert learning and cultural adaptation. Japan didn't merely copy Western technology, it integrated foreign ideas into a uniquely Japanese framework. Samurai and ninja networks, with their long histories of adapting skills and strategies to changing circumstances, played a key role in interpreting, modifying, and applying these new technologies in ways that suited Japan's specific needs and cultural context. This ability to adapt and integrate knowledge, learned over centuries of survival and secrecy, was critical to Japan's success as a modern nation. It also highlights a remarkable continuity between Japan's hidden past and its visible modernization. The strategies, disciplines, and networks developed during centuries of feudal conflict did not vanish. They evolved to meet new challenges, guiding the nation through a period of unprecedented change. And the consequences of this hidden history extend far beyond the Meiji era. Japan's rapid industrialization, military prowess, and cultural influence in the 20th century were all shaped by the strategic, adaptive mindset inherited from these secret networks. Even the efficiency, organization, and resilience often associated with modern Japan can be traced back to practices developed in secrecy during the feudal period and carefully applied to modernization efforts. What's particularly striking is how these hidden forces allowed Japan to achieve a level of self-determination and strength that few observers at the time expected. Western powers often assumed Japan would struggle to adapt, but the combination of visible reforms and invisible guidance from experienced networks ensured a level of efficiency, discipline, and strategic insight that allowed the nation not only to survive but to compete on the global stage. It's a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it appears. The visible achievements, the railroads, factories, and government reforms, are only part of the story. Beneath them lies a hidden web of knowledge, strategy, and adaptation that was essential to Japan's success. By understanding this hidden history, we gain a deeper appreciation not only for Japan's modernization, but also for the ingenuity, resilience, and strategic thinking that made it possible. It challenges the narrative of progress as purely linear or inevitable, and reminds us that human skill, foresight, and secrecy often play decisive roles in shaping the course of history. And it also invites us to think differently about the people behind the scenes, the samurai, ninja, and advisors who adapted to a rapidly changing world, applied centuries of learned skill, and guided a nation through an era of extraordinary upheaval. Their hidden influence is a testament to the power of experience, discretion, and strategic thinking, and it demonstrates how even the most visible transformations are built on layers of unseen effort, careful planning, and inherited knowledge. By exploring this side of history, we gain not only a richer understanding of Japan, but also a broader insight into how societies transform, how innovation is often guided by hidden hands, and how knowledge passed down through generations can shape the trajectory of an entire nation. The hidden story of Japan's modernization teaches us that change is never simple, that progress is rarely straightforward, and that behind every visible achievement lies a complex network of people, knowledge, and strategy working quietly in the shadows to make it possible. When we look at Japanese culture today, it's easy to admire the beauty of its traditional arts, the elegance of its rituals, and the meticulous attention to detail in everything from tea ceremonies to calligraphy. But few people realize that these cultural practices are far more than just aesthetic expressions. Many of them are deeply connected to hidden histories, serving as methods to pass knowledge, preserve secrets, and maintain social and political influence over generations. Take the tea ceremony, for example. On the surface, it appears to be a practice of mindfulness, a way to relax and appreciate the beauty of a cup of tea. But if we look closer, especially at the way it developed during periods of feudal control, we see that it was also a tool for networking, negotiation, and strategic interaction. Samurai, nobles, and political leaders used these gatherings to build alliances, communicate subtle messages, and observe one another's behavior in ways that were socially acceptable and even culturally celebrated. The rituals, gestures, and seating arrangements all carried meaning, and those who understood these nuances could gain an advantage in negotiations or political maneuvering. Similarly, martial arts were not just exercises in physical skill or self-defense. They were codified methods of strategy, discipline, and leadership. Schools of martial arts, or yuha, often combined combat training with lessons in observation, psychological strategy, and even early forms of intelligence gathering. Practitioners learned how to assess opponents, anticipate moves, and adapt quickly to changing circumstances, skills that were invaluable not only on the battlefield, but in navigating the complex social and political networks of the time. Even artistic practices like calligraphy or painting were sometimes vehicles for transmitting knowledge or signaling allegiances. Certain symbols, brushstrokes, or motifs could carry coded messages, indicate social status, or connect members of a particular school or clan. What might appear as decoration or aesthetic preference was often deeply functional, allowing ideas and information to travel subtly between those who understood the system. Mythology and folklore also play a significant role in this hidden history. Stories of gods, spirits, and supernatural events were not simply entertainment. They often encoded historical events, social rules, or political warnings. Take the tales of Amaterasu hiding in a cave or mystical shrines possessing extraordinary powers. These stories were carefully constructed allegories, designed to teach lessons about leadership, social cohesion, and human behavior. By presenting these lessons as myth or legend, those in power could communicate complex ideas without revealing sensitive political truths or upsetting social hierarchies. Even festivals, ceremonies, and seasonal rituals carry hidden layers of meaning. Many of these events trace back to ancient practices designed to organize communities, distribute resources, or maintain social order. What appears today as celebration or cultural pride often originated as a method to ensure stability, reinforce hierarchies, or transmit essential knowledge between generations. And these hidden layers of history are not just ancient artifacts. They have a profound influence on modern Japan. The attention to detail, the emphasis on discipline, observation, and subtle communication, all aspects of Japanese society that are admired worldwide, can be traced back to centuries of practices designed to preserve knowledge and maintain influence. Understanding this connection between culture and hidden history allows us to see Japanese society not just as a collection of customs and rituals, but as a living network of strategies, lessons, and knowledge transmitted across generations. The depth of this cultural encoding is astonishing. Even simple acts like the placement of objects in a room, the sequence of movements in a ritual, or the way a gesture is performed could carry layered meanings that were immediately understood by those trained to notice them. In a way, Japanese culture became a language of subtlety and observation, teaching discipline, awareness, and strategic thinking without ever appearing to be educational in the conventional sense. The hidden history behind these practices also highlights the creativity and adaptability of Japanese society. Faced with centuries of political upheaval, social control, and external threats, people found ways to preserve knowledge, skills, and wisdom in forms that were culturally acceptable and even celebrated. By embedding critical lessons within art, ritual, and tradition, they ensured that essential information could survive periods of repression or social change, and this strategy was remarkably effective. Many of the principles, philosophies, and techniques embedded in traditional Japanese culture persisted even as political systems changed, wars were fought, and modernization transformed society. This continuity, often invisible to the casual observer, demonstrates the power of culture as a vehicle for knowledge, strategy, and adaptation. Another fascinating aspect is how this hidden history interacts with storytelling. Legends, folktales, and even poetry often carried moral, strategic, or social lessons that could be interpreted on multiple levels. On one level, they entertained or inspired, providing shared narratives for a community. On another, they served as coded instructions or reminders of social norms, historical events, or strategic practices. By combining beauty, functionality, and subtlety, these cultural forms became a sophisticated method of transmitting knowledge across generations, often outside the awareness of authorities or outsiders. Understanding this allows us to see Japanese culture as more than just aesthetics or tradition. It is a living repository of history, strategy, and human ingenuity. Every art form, every ritual, and every story can be seen as a thread connecting the present to the past, carrying lessons, knowledge, and hidden meanings that have been refined over centuries. It also challenges our assumptions about the simplicity of culture. What may appear serene, decorative, or purely ceremonial is often layered with complexity, strategy, and historical context. Recognizing these hidden layers transforms the way we experience Japanese culture, allowing us to appreciate not only its beauty, but also the intelligence, foresight, and adaptability that went into its development. And perhaps the most important lesson of all is that history is not confined to textbooks or battles alone. Culture itself is a form of historical record, a living memory that preserves knowledge in forms that are subtle, beautiful, and enduring. By exploring these hidden layers, we gain insight into the ways people adapted to their environment, communicated complex ideas, and maintained continuity across generations, even in the face of political upheaval, social control, and external pressures. This perspective invites us to look more closely at what we take for granted as tradition, to question how knowledge is preserved, and to seek the hidden lessons embedded in the everyday practices, arts, and rituals of a society. In doing so, we uncover a side of Japan that is far richer, more complex, and more fascinating than what is typically presented in schools or popular media. A Japan where culture itself is a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the ability to transmit wisdom across generations in ways that are both subtle and profound.